Hey everyone, welcome. It's Baron, and for those who haven't met him, my co-pilot back there is Taco Cat. This is my video guide on my Bleed Rake Warbringer, a thick, tanky boy who completely negates the damage from over 95% of incoming hits, while creating satisfying bleed pops that easily delete rare enemies by detonating all the monsters around them in a shower of blood. I'm going to include a Path of Building link in the description of this video if you want to follow along there as well. Now, for anyone who follows my channel, you may have noticed that I had a long stretch with no videos at all, and now I've got a couple that are coming out in, fairly rapid succession, at least for me, and that's because I've basically been workshopping two builds simultaneously. I was bouncing back and forth between this build here, the Warbringer, and the Siege Cascade Tactician, which I recently put a video out on. I'm going to link that in the description as well. So, as you can imagine, the time needed to level, acquire currency for, get the gear, research upgrades, do all the experimentation with configurations, all that jazz, it just meant that it took a while to get two different builds to a place where I was willing to show them off to the public. But we are there at last, and so now let us dive in and talk about this Bleed Block Rake Warbringer. The video is divided up into the usual segments of overview, ascendancy, skill tree, gems, and gear, so you can feel free to use the bookmarks in the description to skip around if you have some specific thing that you want to know about. So this is another build like the Tactician that has gone through so many iterations and changes as I've put it together. I honestly wish that I could show you like a time-lapse video of all the different orientations and iterations I've had the passive tree in, just in the last week alone even. Never mind, the several weeks that I've been working on this. This video just in the last week has been delayed at least 5 times due to me making changes to the build in the middle of trying to get the video together. So for a long time, I was trying to make this work with the Stomping Grounds support gem. So that's a strength stacking setup that you can use. Rake is a movement skill. You can therefore support it with Stomping Grounds. And a lot of people just use Rake as a kind of a shell that deals no damage, like you keep it at level 3, but you strength stack so that your support gem, Stomping Grounds, will do all the damage for you. In the end, as I was playing around with that, it just became unavoidable that I had to pick a lane. This build can either function just fine as a hit-based, strength-stacking Stomping Grounds build and not care about Rake's damage, or be a bleed build that does care about Rake's damage. All my attempts at making a kind of hybrid that cares a little bit about both, they fell flat. You just couldn't do it. Now, as you probably gathered from the title of the video, I chose Bleed. And so, kind of by accident, I didn't set out meaning to do this, but I've kind of recreated a build that was very popular back when I first started playing Path of Exile 1, like 5 or 6 years ago. Bleed Max Block Gladiator was the build in that game. It's got a lot of the same vibe here. Now, you may stop me here and say, wait, Baron, wait. This is a Warbringer. Wouldn't it make more sense to go with a hit-based build since we're taking an armor break ascendancy node? Bleed is damage over time, and armor cannot mitigate damage over time, only hits. And that much is certainly true, but there are still several reasons why I will argue that this is a valid choice. I'm going to defend it here as we transition from the overview to the section of the video where we discuss Ascendancy choice, including that armor break node. Let's start with that. It's called Anvil's Weight. It says break armor equal to 10% of damage dealt, which effectively means that most targets are going to have their armor broken almost instantly, especially if you have any investment at all into increasing the efficiency of armor break. So why a bleed build of all things with that ascendancy node? First of all, the best way to scale the hit-based version of this build is to use the Tangle Tongue Spear like everyone and their brother is doing, and that means investing into critical strikes, which is just a totally different path than the one I had been constructing for my skill tree. I would have had to basically redo it from scratch. It's also more expensive to scale crit, and speaking of expenses, strength stacking, which you'd have to do for Stomping Grounds, is also kind of a rich man's game. So just overall, the hit-based path was not the one for me. It's perfectly valid. You could make a great build that way, but I wanted to go a different direction. On top of that, though, in addition, I would say that the supposed anti-synergy between bleeding and armor break is maybe not quite as extreme as you think it is. Now, it is absolutely true and should be emphasized that armor on enemies does not mitigate bleeding damage. It doesn't even change the bleed calculation. In other words, just because your initial hit is doing less damage because of the enemy's armor, that does not mean that the bleed calculation is any less because of the armor. The bleed is being calculated at their pre-mitigation stat, before armor is taken into account, in other words. This is usually a good thing, an advantage for bleed builds, that you don't have to care about the enemy's armor. And in this case, you would definitely be within your rights to question me, why would we want to take an armor break node and combine it with a bleed build? And there are 3 reasons. First up, a purely practical thing here, I just needed to take some kind of damage node for the build. The concept of the build started with the max block defensive package, and I only decided on my offense later, and this was just really the only node that made any sense, was armor break. So in one sense, I take the node because it's the only one I can, and if I had to just rely on it to improve the little bit of my damage that is coming from the initial hit, then so be it. But that's not even the case. There's actually a couple of important ways in which breaking armor is still going to help our damage that's originating from bleed. How? Why? So in mapping scenarios, we are actually going to be doing a surprisingly high number of hits, little hits, and relying on them for clear speed as opposed to just bleed. Spoiler alert for upcoming sections, but we're causing this chain of explosions that starts with Herald of Blood, which causes enemies to explode if they've ever had bleeding inflicted on them. That explosion from that is a hit. We're supporting it with Hemocrystals, also a hit. Also supporting it with Envenom, Bursting Plague. We're getting another physical hit, and don't worry, we're going to explain how all that works in the gem section. But the point is that these are all physical hits, and this is a particularly potent way of spiking down a tough, rare monster who's surrounded by a lot of trash mobs who are going to die, explode. The first couple hits from their deaths are going to destroy the rare enemy's armor, and then the next few hits will finish them off. So this is often why, as I mentioned in the intro to the video, you're often going to see rare enemies just get deleted outright, or at least have their health dramatically spike downward when they're part of a big screen-wide explosion. The other time that broken armor is going to matter is when we're using our secondary skill of Blood Hunt. Blood Hunt is a finishing move that we rely on for really big targets. You're not probably going to use this against a rare enemy unless you're not fully geared out yet, or it's a really, really tough rare enemy. As long as your rake DPS is high enough, you can usually kill rare enemies faster by just holding rake down. But when it does come time for bossing, the way Blood Hunt works is that it looks at all the bleeding damage that specific enemy has taken up to that point, and it does only count damage that has actually been dealt. In other words, it's not looking at damage that is scheduled to be dealt in the future by a currently active bleed, but it looks at the damage that has been dealt by bleed so far, and it turns that into a massive hit. So part of Blood Hunt is it is around 800% of your base weapon damage between the initial stab and the explosion it causes, and then on top of that, it adds 25% of however much damage has been dealt as bleeding to that enemy. Now, the part based on their bleeding is labeled as unscalable damage, since, you already scaled that damage however you're scaling your bleed. So, no, you don't get to double dip, scale once for the bleed, and then scale again for the explosion based on the bleed. But there are a couple of crucial things to keep in mind. First of all, the portion of the attack based on your base weapon damage, that's still affected by all normal scaling methods, which is why we're just going to support it with a normal suite of support gems. But second, and more importantly for our Ascendancy, being unscalable just means that you can't improve it with your skill tree or support gems, things that have wording like increased damage or more damage. But things that take place on the enemy side of the damage calculation, like mitigation or increased damage taken, those will still affect the damage from Blood Hunt. That means that an enemy can mitigate Blood Hunt with armor, but by the same token, broken armor has a big benefit for us. It removes all their mitigation, and then on top of that, the effect of the fully broken armor status is that they will be taking 20% increased damage from physical hits, which Blood Hunt is. The damage of Blood Hunt isn't being scaled, the enemy simply takes more damage from the same size incoming hit. In effect, this means that once a big enemy has taken around, say, 60% of their life as bleeding damage, you can just dash in with Blood Hunt for a kind of ultra culling strike and make them explode. On the off chance that you miscalculate and didn't quite kill them, you can just do a backflip with Disengage, which we have Culling Strike linked to, and that'll finish them off. So, in summary, armor still helpful for enemies against our damage, and the ability to easily break it is a big offensive benefit for the build. However, let's make note here. Warbringer is supposed to have 2 nodes for armor breaking, and we only take one of them, leaving the seemingly more powerful negative armor node called Imploding Impacts on the table in favor of some more defense. And I think it's worth addressing why I'm not taking that node. It's kind of important. For better or for worse, and it's mostly worse, that negative armor effect basically doesn't work right now, meaning that we're free to use that Ascendancy point for something else, which is cool, but it's bad because we don't get that kind of added effect of the enemy having negative armor. Now, mathematically, it does appear to be technically functional. Like, the thing is happening. It's not bugged or anything like that, but because of the way that armor and damage are calculated, it winds up being basically pointless. Again, I don't think this is a bug, but I also don't think that it was strictly intentional either. I think this is an oversight. I just don't think it was thought all the way through. Basically, to explain here a little further, as you may know, armor mitigates less and less of a hit the bigger a hit is. It works logarithmically. So, for example, a hit twice as big as another one, that doesn't just require twice as much armor to mitigate the same amount of damage. It requires many times more armor just to mitigate something twice as big, to mitigate the same percentage of damage. So to get up to 90% damage reduction, which is the theoretical maximum, I think, the bigger the hit gets, you need exponentially more armor to mitigate it. The higher the hit damage goes, the wider and wider the gap gets with how much armor you'd need. So in short, the bigger the hit, the less that armor will impact it, even in proportionally increased values. Armor is most effective at mitigating small to medium-sized hits. And I go to all the effort of explaining that because through what I hope is just a bit of an oversight, like I said, it appears to work the same way for negative armor. Negative armor makes you take increased damage in the same way that positive armor lets you negate it. That part works as expected. That's all normal. It works just the same as positive armor in reverse. Instead of mitigating the damage, it causes you to take increased. But on the specifics, you would think that a big hit plus a large amount of negative armor would work together synergistically and be a massive damage spike, with the damage getting exponentially better the bigger the hit is, the same way it works with positive armor. Unfortunately, negative armor seems to be obeying the law of have a limited impact on big hits instead of mitigate less damage per armor for big hits. This is a crucial distinction that we need to understand, and it's one if I wanted to grind a gear games maybe didn't think through when designing this node. It seems clear to me that this relationship should be reversed for negative armor, but at the moment, the stronger your character gets, the bigger a hit your character is doing, the less negative armor does for you. It doesn't make your damage worse, per se. The negative armor just does less and less for you at the same values the stronger you get, the bigger your hits are. So it can work fairly well, I think, for that little flurry of small hits I talked about during mapping, when you get all those little explosions. But the effect is basically negated altogether when you want it most, the big finishing blow we use Blood Hunt for. The damage is so high that the armor calculation basically says, oh, this is too high for armor to have anything to do with this. We won't increase the damage the enemy takes by much at all because the hit is so big. And that's a damn shame, because if that node functioned what I think is properly, what I think it's supposed to do, then this could be a really, really cool finishing move. You'd probably be able to finish an enemy off from above half health. But, you know, it would take us from a great all-arounder, which the build is right now. It is definitely a great all-arounder. It would take it to that next level. I think. So in lieu of that node, we are taking Jade Heritage for even more defense. This node causes us to slowly build up stacks of a unique resource called Jade. Of course, 1 per second up until you get 10. Each stack gives 1% physical damage reduction, and you lose a stack when you take physical damage. We are doing a lot of blocking and evading, so that's not going to happen terribly often in this build, and they do regenerate pretty quickly, so you will very frequently find yourself in practice to be at the maximum of 10 stages. Now, this has a second effect. You can also, if you want, press a button to consume these stacks for approximately 5 to 6 seconds of guard. This is an expanded hit pool. It goes above your life and above your energy shield, and this takes damage first, this guard. Honestly, I don't use it that way. It's just a playstyle thing. I don't really like how reactive I have to be to use it effectively, and it gives me kind of this FOMO that I might be using it at the wrong time and then finding that I need it later. Like, if you've played a classic, turn-based RPG, have you ever had that like really rare healing item that sits in your inventory and goes unused because you're always like, what if I need it later? That's kind of how I feel about having this guard. So worrying that I might use it at the wrong time, I honestly just pretend that the function doesn't exist at all. If they ever buffed it so that it lasts until depleted, until having, instead of having a time limit, then that'd be a different story. I would probably use the guard because it is 6% of your maximum life per stack. So you're basically getting 60% of your maximum life as guard again. So I would definitely use that if I could just think a little bit less about it. All that is to say, though, this node that we're taking is kind of underwhelming. It's the least impactful of what we're taking, and I would gladly give it up if that imploding impact armor node gets adjusted. Gladly switch out. The other two nodes we're taking, these are the ones that we were always going to take. This is the point of the build: Renly's Training and Turtle Charm. Renly's Training basically says it doesn't matter what our shield has for block. Our base block chance is always going to be 40% and then increased by any sources of increased block chance. So this basically just allows us to focus on other mods on our shield and not worry if our shield has low base block. Then the second node, Turtle Charm. Well, this doesn't start off great, guys. This hits us with a really nasty 25% less block chance penalty. Again, focus on the word less. This cannot be overcome simply by taking 25% increased block chance. That's just a few nodes on the tree. That'd be nothing. It's much worse than that. Less is a multiplier like more. So we actually have to stack a lot of block chance to overcome this downside. However, in return, we get the main effect of the node. Our block no longer just applies to basic melee and projectile attacks and spells. It now applies to all explosions, slams, and any other AoEs. This is the way block works in PoE 1. It always applies to everything. But in PoE 2, we have to take this node, but that makes block very potent for us. From there, we want to take the maximum possible advantage of it, so I am using the Svallen Shield in this build. Spoiler alert. The Svallen Shield, this is going to assess us another pretty egregious penalty. It lowers our maximum block chance from 75, where it starts. It now takes us down by 10 to 20% to at most 65% block chance. That's the new maximum. Maybe if you get a very lucky corruption, you could have it at like 67, 68, I think is like the absolute outside highest you can have it at. But that's still a pretty hefty penalty. And then on top of that penalty, the shield is not really doing much else. It's a high opportunity cost. We're giving up the ability to have life, resist, attributes on our shield. And yet, over 2/3 of Warbringers on the leaderboard are using this shield. Why? And the answer is Lucky Block. Lucky is a keyword in Path of Exile, and it means that a chance gets rolled twice. So in this case, block chance gets rolled twice for every hit, and if either block would have been a success, we block that hit. So with that 65% chance to block after we take the 10% max penalty, every enemy attack, we have to kind of reframe how we think of block chance to make sense of this. Instead of thinking of it as 65% block chance, think of it as Every attack has a 35% chance to hit us, but the enemy has to successfully roll that 35% chance to hit twice in a row. So the math is 0.35 times 0.35. And this ends up with around a 12% chance for that hit to get through. This, you flip it back around, effectively means an 88% block chance in practice. Now that is worth the sacrifice. 88% of all spells, projectiles, punches, AoEs, explosions is just negated. The damage does not exist for us. So that's the Ascendancy covered. A lot of block, a little bit of fizz mitigation, and a little bit of damage. Let's talk main passive skill tree. It actually doesn't wind up being all too complicated, despite I talked a big game about all the tweaking I've done to it, but in practice, everything I'm doing on the skill tree falls into one of the following categories in descending order of how much emphasis I'm placing on it. Approximately block, ailments, global defenses, enemies on low life, and just miscellaneous. Spoiler alert for the gear section, yes, the low life nodes mean what you think they do. This is, I freely admit, a basic bitch, meta cuck, deepest tower build, but I'm proud of it. That is an item that enables a ton of fun builds with fun playstyles that would have had mediocre or even bad damage without the item, so I don't feel any shame in using it. It opens up experimentation. The other noteworthy thing is that when talking about the tree, I've got to point out that this build, the way it currently is right now, this is one of 3 major defensive iterations I've experimented with for this build. Some of the many changes that I've been tweaking around with. So on top of the max block, which that's been in every iteration, but on top of that, the other defensive layers, I've experimented with a version that was pure armor and life, armor and energy shield, and evasion and energy shield. And much like the tactician build, the writing was kind of on the wall for this one. Even this build, even this class, the warrior, he's got a big shield, stab you in the face with a spear, strength-based class like the warrior. Even this guy is best off going with evasion and energy shield, which just doesn't seem like it's thematically appropriate. It doesn't really seem to fit. And to me, that's just a sign that GGG should take that defenses need a balance pass. If even this class thinks that evasion energy shield is the best way to go. But it is, so I'm doing it. It's a very potent setup. So the way the math is going to work, how it works with block. For starters, all hits will first be assessed by evasion. This build has stacked up so that in a given combat scenario, we are going to be between 60 to 70% chance to evade at any given time. So let's call it 65% chance just for the purposes of the conversation. So it's worth noting that it is not truly a random 65% chance. It uses this complicated system to gradually raise your evasion after every hit you take and lower your evasion after every hit that you evade, with the idea that you're not going to have either long stretches of getting hit a bunch in a row or long stretches of luckily evading a bunch in a row. It keeps you even. It actually kind of works like, I don't know if you've seen like how a train stays on the track. The way it works is that the wheel is designed in a conical shape. It's a cone. And so if the train starts drifting one direction or the other, one wheel starts having to spin further and further around to make a full rotation of the wheel, and that just causes it to auto-correct back to center. That's kind of how evasion works in Path of Exile. It's an entropy-based system is what they call it. But basically what that means is that you get a fairly even smattering of hits, right around 65% chance. So, for starters, only 35% of hits are making it through this phase. And then remember what we said with block, out of that 35%, only 12 to 13% of that are actually going to deal damage to us instead of being blocked. We therefore have an effective chance to take damage from a hit of less than 5% for most given hits. And then when we do get hit, we've got Ghost Dance to shoot our energy shield back up to full or nearly full. That's why the passive tree has some focus on energy shield. So as a result of all this, much like our spiritual predecessor, the PoE1 Bleed Block Gladiator, we mostly only have to worry about damage over time in this build. That's pretty much the only reason that I have my hand near a life flask button, is for damage over time. But let's take a quick tour of the tree so that I can show you some specific nodes and why I'm taking them. Like I said, block is a ton of the tree. We've got block with Defender's Resolve, with Unstoppable Barrier, with Vigilance. We get a little life on block here, which is nice. We get this over here. Lay Siege is not chance to block, but it is increased damage per chance to block. Now I will say this loses some potency by taking Svallen, because this does not work off of our effective chance to block. It works, as far as I know, I don't think it does. I believe it works off our raw sheet chance to block, which is 65%. But it's still very potent. 65% increased damage from one node is very, very good. So no problems there. We are also taking some global defense related stuff. I've got evasion and energy shield here. Now here's a cute little trick. I can take a lot of these nodes, like backup plan and escape strategy, that give me increased evasion if I've been hit recently. And why can I get away with that? Because I'm only evading around 2/3 of hits, but the other ones are hitting my shield. And yes, mechanically, the game will count the shield getting hit as me getting hit. So even though I take no damage from blocked hits, I constantly have the maxed out effect of escape strategy, backup plan, and there's one other hanging around here somewhere. I forget where it is. Well, whatever the case may be, we're getting a lot of benefit from the fact that we are blocking many hits. That raises our ability to evade the rest. Let's talk about where we're taking ailments. So this is an interesting one, exposed wounds. I'm not really taking this for the break increase armor. Like, yes, that's nice against pinnacle bosses, but I am in fact taking this and the whole chain beyond it for the chance to inflict ailments. This may seem silly. When Rake inflicts a bleed by default, you don't need chance to inflict ailments with Rake. It's built right into the skill. But as we're going to go into when we get to the Spirit Gems, there's still a very good reason to get our chance to inflict ailments above 90%. So more on that later. But there is some additional. So over here we've got fast acting toxins. Damaging ailments deal damage faster. This is both a damage boost and a quality of life boost. Like, the faster you can get your ailments to deal damage, the quicker those pops happen in packs. That's a common complaint about damage over time builds. Some people don't like the fact that you hit an enemy and then you've got to wait a half second or a second before they die. And like, yes, there's a very satisfying explosion after that. The whole screen goes up in blood and smoke. But yeah, I can see why that'd be frustrating. So again, we get both a DPS increase and a quality of life increase here. Down with deterioration, we get magnitude of ailments inflicted, and again, importantly, chance to inflict ailments. Over here, we've got, are there any more ailment stuff? That might be pretty much it on ailments. Let's talk area of effect. So to get that Herald of Blood bleed pop up, I'm taking Doomsayer for Herald of blood damage. Now, this doesn't scale a ton of the Herald of Blood damage. It scales the flat physical part of it, but the part that's based on the enemy's life, it doesn't scale that. We're really taking this for the area of effect. Same reason we're taking Devastation up here. Herald of Blood is considered an attack, so it does benefit from Devastation's increased area of effect for attacks. Oh, my bad. I did miss this bleed node over here. Chance to inflict bleed, increased magnitude of bleed. This is all great stuff here. And then let's talk about the Deepest Tower package. You're probably familiar with it if you've seen any builds using Deepest Tower. You take Stars Aligned. Damage with hits is lucky against low life enemies. The helmet makes all enemies around you considered to be on low life. We already described what lucky means, so the damage rolls twice. You get whatever the better one is. We take Finishing Blows, 60% increased damage, 30% increased stun buildup, and then the big heavy hitter, 120% increased damage with hits against enemies that are on low life. So really stupefying amounts of increased damage from that helmet and these nodes. And the last major thing to note on the tree is, come way up here. And we'll talk about this in the items section, but I'm getting the entire Evasion Energy Shield wheel that includes Shadow Dancing. This is what I was looking for. This is the one that gets me evasion if I've been hit recently. No wonder I couldn't find it. It was way up here. It's got Shadow Dancing, and it's got Spectral Ward, plus the maximum energy shield per 12 evasion on equipped body armor. So that incentivizes us to seek out a hybrid body armor with a lot of both evasion and energy shield. It's great. So we'll talk about how we're getting this when we get to the items section, but I think that's pretty much it for the tour of the tree. Let's move on, talk about our skill gems, and then we can finish out with that gear section, right? So as you know, the main clearing skill is Rake here. And Rake is a skill that dashes you forward with an AoE swing of your spear, and like I said, it automatically inflicts a bleed. The farther you dash, the more damage it does. So against tough targets, they're going to need multiple hits. You're probably going to pair this with Disengage, which does a backflip away. It gets you out to the limit of your range that you can rake inward from, and then you just alternate between these two. Rake in, disengage out. Rake in, disengage out, etc. We are going to support Rake with the following. We've got Heft for more maximum physical hit damage. This is really helping us in an indirect way with Deepest Tower. It's only increasing the maximum physical damage roll. It's not raising up the minimum damage roll, but that's okay because with Lucky Damage, we're more likely to get a value from the newly expanded maximum hit range. So this is very good for us. Execute is one that benefits us much more directly with Deepest Tower. It's just 50% more damage against low life enemies, so that's amazing. Heavy Swing, more melee physical damage, which translates into more bleed. It is less attack speed, so in mapping scenarios, it's totally acceptable to swap this out for something else, just for smoothness, quality of life. Deep Cuts, more magnitude of bleeding with supported skills at the cost of less hit damage. Now, you may say, oh, can you swap this out for mapping so that you can kind of get instantaneous kills more often in mapping and then swap to the, this as a DPS option for bossing? And the reason I don't do that is because, as I mentioned, Herald of Blood scales its explosion damage based on how much bleeding has been inflicted on enemies. So you actually want a majority of their damage to be done via bleeding. In fact, in some situations, that actually makes it better to only rake one time and then just let the bleeding kill them, rather than trying to flurry them with a bunch of rake hits, which will actually reduce the amount of damage they've taken from bleed. If you just wait a second, just be patient and wait a second or less for them to die of bleeding, the explosion from Herald of Blood will be much more potent and proliferate better. So then last but not least, Brutality, just straight up more physical damage. We're not trying to do any elemental damage with this. So there you have it. Disengage, meanwhile, which we discussed, it's supported by Ingenuity for cooldown recovery. This makes it pretty much instantaneous, since the cooldown is only, 1.5 seconds to start with. This means that by the time we've raked back in again, you're probably clear to disengage back out. So Ingenuity is good. Holy Descent to give us consecrated ground. This helps our life regen. Culling Strike is Culling Strike. It's great. And then Cadence, I'm playing around with this. It just makes it faster attack speed, and you just can't use it too often or else it gets disabled for a little while. And then our next gem, let's talk about Bloodhound's Mark. So Bloodhound's Mark, this is a mark skill that you put on the big boys, the bosses, and it causes enemies to take stun buildup not just from hit damage, as it would normally be, but from bleeding damage as well. This is actually more potent than you think. Enemy stun buildup will go through the roof once they've been marked, because the effectiveness of damage for stun buildup, it's 3 times more for bleeding with this buff than it would be for normal hit-based stun buildup. And then once the enemy is officially stunned, the mark will trigger an explosion. Now, the damage of that explosion is pretty much totally irrelevant. We're not scaling it in any way. But we are doing something pretty cute with it instead. We are going to link the Rupture support gem. I honestly expect, I suspect that this design, this interaction was designed. Like somebody thought to themselves, you are going to use Bloodhound's Mark and you're going to support it with Rupture. It's just too perfect, because Rupture says if a supported skill hits a heavy stunned enemy, it automatically aggravates bleeding on the enemy. Reminder that aggravate is a keyword that means the enemy is considered to be moving while bleeding even if they are not, and moving while bleeding causes a massive 100% more damage multiplier. Normally, rupture would be a hassle to weave into your build. It would be a pain in the neck. You would either have to put it in your main setup, where you're almost never getting any benefit from it, or you put it in a special utility setup where you constantly have to keep an eye on the enemy's stun bar and really quickly use some other skill once you've stunned him. But this way, we'll skip all that hassle because we would have wanted to use Blood Mark anyways. It's convenient to stun an enemy, and when we use it, it is always going to cause a hit on a heavily stunned enemy, by definition, because the explosion triggers at the moment we heavy stun an enemy. That's the whole point of the skill. So this combination is perfect. Rupture will always be triggering when it is needed. This mark will therefore make enemies much easier to stun, and then the moment they are stunned, their bleed damage ramps up to the moon. We are also going to support this with single out. It's not nearly as important for Warbringers because it is an armor breaker. Other classes who run basically this build are much more reliant on single out for breaking armor, but it'll help us break armor against big bosses even faster, and it's not like there's much else to support this mark with, so we take it. But then let's talk about that coup de grace, the finishing move, Blood Hunt. As described when I was talking about the armor break Ascendancy node, your combat rotation against a boss will be hit him with Blood Mark, then alternate between Rake to dash in, Disengage to leap back out. Pretty quickly, any kind of map boss level threat is going to get stunned by that combo. A T4 Pinnacle boss, probably not. You're going to need more focus than that. But like anything in the map boss realm is going to get stunned by that back and forth very quickly, at which point their health bar will start dropping a lot faster. You may have to do this rotation several times against those tougher enemies, but once you're gonna start seeing that 50 to 60% of their health bar will eventually be taken up by the kind of dark, gelatinous red visual effect that indicates that the health is gone and it was lost to bleeding specifically. When their health bar is black, that's just lost from normal damage. When it's this kind of gelatinous red, that means the health is gone and it's gone to bleeding. Once about 60% of their health bar is that kind of gooey red, that's when you use Blood Hunt. You'll notice that there is going to be some of that black bar because we are doing some damage with hits. So the enemy will probably be down like 75% of their health. They'll be at like 25% health by the time you can actually use Blood Hunt. But when we do, what's going to happen is Blood Hunt will tally up all the damage that was lost to bleeding, and then it takes a quarter of that damage and it slams it home as a big, massive extra hit. By this point, the enemy's armor is long gone, so they have no damage mitigation against it. That's also why we're supporting it with Exploit Weakness, to get more damage, at least for the weapon component of the effect. So let's talk about that. Remember that the portion that is based on how much blood loss the enemy has, you cannot scale that for Blood Hunt. You can, however, scale the portion that just says, the 324% attack damage here, and then the explosion for 648% attack damage here. That stuff is scaled by your support gem, so it's still worth supporting it, even if the blood loss portion is not scalable. So other supports we're using, Bloodlust. Bloodlust is just pure damage against bleeding enemies. Close combat, because we're going to be dashing in with Blood Hunt. Momentum, because we will be, again, dashing in with Blood Hunt. Now here you have a choice between Combo Finisher and Culmination. These are both gems that rely on building up combo in order to use them. Their effects are nearly identical, and you can only use one of them. It's your choice. Combo Finisher is the more reliable of the two. It will always deal 40% more damage and require 5 previous hits in the combo before you can use it. Culmination, on the other hand, is the same idea, but you can use it with any amount of combo. It just starts off theoretically weaker. It gives you 3% more damage per combo. So if you're in a combat situation where you plan on generating more than like 13 or 14 hits before you use Blood Hunt, then Culmination is mathematically superior to Combo Finisher. But if you're undecided, you can't go wrong with Combo Finisher. Like if you're not sure what to do, just use Combo Finisher. It's steady and it's reliable. Also, if you did want to use the skill more often, you could sub it out for like Concentrated Effect, I guess, which has no combo requirement. It just lowers the radius, and it does a little bit less damage. The other active skill that I've got equipped, it's the last active skill to talk about, is not one that I use super often, but it does have some situational benefits, and that is Spear Field. I know that some people build around Spear Field as like their main mapping skill, but for me it's a little slow and passive for my tastes. You know, it's situationally useful. Like I said, if you are dealing with a stationary setting, waves of enemies, something like a strong box, or when you need to slow down a highly mobile boss, Spear Field can be good. We are going to link it with rage support to help top up our rage, and we are also going to support it with Impale, which is going to improve the damage of our next Rake or Disengage or Blood Hunt. We're going to support it with Bludgeon, so that each spear knocks back enemies into another spear and has another effect. Martial Tempo, just to get the spears out faster, and then Rearm, so that each spear has at least a 25% chance of rearming, and this is iterative. Once it's rearmed, you can theoretically rearm it again and again if you get lucky and roll that 25% chance over and over again. Anyways, that is it on the active skill gems. Let's move on. We're near the end now, and let's talk about the spirit reserving skills, and let's talk about the big one, the complex one first. This is the one that we're going to spend the majority of the rest of the video talking about, actually. Herald of Blood. So, this is a crucial piece of our clear speed, which is why I'm going to spend so much time talking about it. We are going to link it with some unexpected supports. Some of them are expected. Magnified Effect for more area of effect, Reach for more area of effect, those are not surprising. You want those for a Herald skill, and you can imagine why. You want the explosions to be bigger. But what about supporting it with Envenom? Why is a bleed build linking Envenom for poison chance? Well, it's because of this other support gem called Bursting Plague. Bursting Plague does something that is very unique and very important for us. It takes the chaos damage over time from poison, and that doesn't synergize very well with our build, and then it actually adds a hit of physical damage that is based on the amount of chaos damage that the enemy was taking from the poison. This does synergize with our build. Physical hits cause bleeding, which we are scaling the hell out of. This will also allow us to chain our Herald. See, the question would be, why does it matter? Why do you care about adding a physical hit to Herald of Blood when Herald of Blood is already dealing a physical hit? Why do we care? Why do this convoluted thing? And the answer is that Herald of Blood cannot by itself inflict bleeding. But it can inflict poison, which we're going to do. It adds his other physical hit, and that physical hit from Bursting Plague can inflict both poison and bleed to keep the chain going, provided that the poison we are inflicting is strong enough, because again, the damage of the physical hit will be based on the poison. So if we want to proliferate the explosions, we need our poison to be fairly strong, and that is why I have gone out of my way on my jewels and on my tree to, wherever I can, take generic magnitude of ailments instead of just magnitude of bleeding. So I do know that this is kind of a lot to keep up with, but basically the combination of Herald of Blood, Poison Chance, and Bursting Plague allows physical hits to chain through packs, particularly if the packs are tightly clustered together. The order will go like this. You will use Rake as your main attack. It hits the enemy, it inflicts a bleed. That bleeding enemy dies, and Herald of Blood triggers an explosion because that enemy had suffered blood loss. That's what Herald of Blood does. Herald of Blood triggers an explosion. The damage from that explosion is based on the amount of blood loss the enemy had, so like I said, it is in your best interest for clear purposes if you just let enemies wait a second and die from blood loss. This will cause bigger explosions, and the chain of self-perpetuating damage starts because Herald of Blood will inflict a poison on 90+% of enemies. It might even be 100% of enemies now that I've taken this chunk of ailment stuff right here. And because of Bursting Plague, it will also inflict a bleed on 90% of enemies or more. Whenever those enemies die, Bursting Plague will cause an explosion proportionate to the strength of the poison, and Herald of Blood will trigger again. These explosions can cycle, which is why you see these proliferating explosions in the mapping showcase. So what's unclear to me about Bursting Plague, and this is just something that I don't know if it needs experimentation, maybe Grinding Gear Games can clarify for us, or maybe somebody knows, you can put in the comments. It has a cooldown of, here, let me hold Alt here, Plague Burst. Where'd that cooldown go? Here we go, 0.1 second. It's not a long cooldown, but it does mean that it can't constantly trigger. And what's not clear to me is if this can only trigger on one enemy every 0.1 second, or if several explosions can go off at the same time on different enemies, but you have to wait a server tick or two before you can trigger on other enemies. I don't know. But in any case, it does help the clear. This whole process is also being smoothed out by this support here, Hemocrystals. Hemocrystals are another source of physical hit explosions. They wait a second and a half after the initial death, and then they trigger another set of explosions. So this kind of smooths out, even with the cooldown on Bursting Plague, there will be more physical hits coming, thanks to Hemocrystals. This is also handy for catching enemies who wander into the area after the initial explosions have gone off, and that kind of frees up room for enemies to wander in, and then Hemocrystals will hit them, and the chain of explosions keeps going. So it's a big pile of more and more physical hits, bleeds, poisons ad nauseum. The limiting factor is going to be the AoE. General purpose AoE for Bursting Plague, and Attack and Herald AoE for Herald of Blood. In a sufficiently dense area, as you've seen in the videos, the whole screen will usually go up in a fountain of blood after 1 or 2 enemy deaths, and the explosions will keep going for a couple seconds as more and more die. We do have other spirit reserving gems too, which we'll address quickly. Like any good evasion energy shield build, we are taking the defensive combo of Wind Dancer and Ghost Dance, supporting Wind Dancer with Cannibalism for life on kill. Lacerate just to see if I can get Wind Dancer to do some bleeding, set off some chains. Who knows if this is doing anything for me, but it was fun. What else have we got? We've got Berserk, which you do have to invest into some strength to get this, but it increases the effect of Rage, which is very potent. It's very good. Reminder, Rage is giving you a more multiplier to attack damage, so this is potent to increase the effect of it. We are getting Rage from a jewel effect during normal mapping combat, and then, you know, for strong boxes, delirium, bosses, that kind of thing, you get it from Spearfield. You'll get Rage from there. But that is actually it on spirit reserving gems. Herald of Blood is really kind of the main show when it comes to spirit. So let's finish out with the gear. A lot of this you will have already heard in other sections of the video, but let's make it official. The weapon is a standard issue physical spear. The only thing of note about this is that you kind of want to bias the mods you get towards raw physical hit damage over DPS. In other words, I would sacrifice attack speed for something like gem levels or a little bit more physical damage per hit. You know, attack speed is great quality of life and everything, don't get me wrong, but remember that as a bleed build, we do have a little bit more flexibility on attack speed. We are dealing damage over time while we wind up the next attack. So slow attack speed does not prevent us from dealing good damage per second. So attack speed will help us clear faster. It lets you fish for bigger bleeds a little faster, but it is not nearly as important for this build as it is in other builds. So prioritize physical damage and melee gem levels on your spear. I think I paid 2 div for this spear, maybe, and you can get something that is almost as good as this for less than a divine. If you do not have leech mana on your spear, you can get it on a ring, which is what I had to do. Let's talk about some of our mandatory uniques. So, we're going to have to set aside, and we're going to have to know that we will not be able to do anything else with our helmet, our shield, and 1 ring slot, because we are going to take the Fallen Shield, as mentioned earlier, the Deepest Tower helmet, as mentioned earlier, and then the only one we haven't talked about yet is the Venopuncture ring. Venopuncture, it's a nice ring. It gives us bleed chance for those explosions. That's why we want to get our bleed and poison chance near 100%, even though Rake is dealing bleed natively. We want all of our hits to be able to inflict a bleed. So the fact that this increases our chance of bleeding is great. Magnitude of bleeding is obviously very good. All around, great ring. It has some other good effects. The fizz damage and the strength is good, but really this is more about the bleed chance and bleed magnitude. Deepest Tower, there's not much to say about Deepest Tower that hasn't already been said. I mean, it's nice that it has life and chaos resistance on it, because we would have taken this helmet even if it didn't have those things, so that's a nice bonus, but this is just a ton of damage for the build. And then Svalin. Svalin is Svalin. There's nothing else going on here. It's got a decent chunk of armor, and it's got lucky block chance. That's what it's here for. Our remaining slots, aside from those become more important because we need to get our resistance and attribute requirements, and then as much life, evasion, and energy shield as you possibly can. And we've got to do it with limited slots because we've got 3 already taken up by this other stuff that we're not going to get rid of. So on top of these restrictions, having 3 unique items, there's also the restriction that your body armor and your amulet, you should probably set aside a slot each on those for spirit so that we can afford all of the spirit reserving gems that we just talked about. As you can see, the current iteration of the amulet is giving attributes, life, chaos res, and an anointment of blood tearing, which is giving us just physical damage, magnitude of bleed, raw DPS. I should probably check whether that is giving me more damage than I would get for taking offensive stance over here, which is a second node that does the same thing that I'm already getting once, 65% increased damage. So I should check in POB whether that would be more than I'm getting from blood tearing, but both would be very good. What else? Belt. Belt is giving life and resistances. Gloves are life, evasion, energy shield, intelligence, resistances. Boots are basically the same as the gloves, but instead of intelligence, you have movement speed. It's got no attributes. And then let's talk rune slots. So right now, a lot of my rune slots are taken up with elemental resistance. You can shore up things like elemental resistance and attributes with your runes until you get that kind of elite gear with all high tier affixes that are going to do all this without needing runes. Once you've got that, you can start indulging in some luxuries. I've begun to indulge in luxuries, but I still have many of my runes taken up with lightning resistance. So you can get, like, in your gloves, you can get a wolf talisman for magnitude of bleeding. That's very nice. In my body armor, you can get iron runes for evasion and energy shield. That's very nice. Something that I don't have yet, you could get a bear talisman in your helmet for increased AoE. And then you would probably want to do the upcoming, not released yet, although by the time you're watching this video, it might be, there will be a new talisman or rune for boots that add movement speed to your boots. So you probably want to take that. And then let's close out. Let's talk about the jewels that I'm taking on the passive tree. So I've gone out of my way to take a bunch of jewels. The big one that I kind of alluded to before is I'm taking this From Nothing jewel. Passives in Radius of Eternal Youth can be allocated without being connected on the tree. This allows me to take all these evasion and energy shield nodes up here and saving a metric ton of travel points. I previously actually did travel all the way out to get those nodes, and I was just missing a ton of damage and other stuff as a result. So this is nice, being able to do this. just our location starting on the tree as a warrior, it just doesn't lend itself to evasion and energy shield. But it is the best defensive mechanic, so I use from nothing to go out there and grab a bunch of those. You can also get percent evasion, or pardon me, percent energy shield on a bunch of your jewels, as many as you can. Just this one's got 19% energy shield. This one over here's got, this one actually doesn't have any. I'd like to fix that. But this one has got 18% energy shield, and really what you're doing is you are getting energy shield on any jewel you can once you've got your block cleaned up. You may need some jewels to get block, and what's important to remember is that energy shield can only come on sapphire jewels, the blue ones, and block can only come on ruby jewels, the red ones. So take as many ruby jewels as you need to get block and your rage on melee hit, another thing that can only come from a ruby jewel. And once you've got that figured out, the rest can be sapphire jewels to get that energy shield. And let's see, other than that, things that I'm looking for on the jewels, just like nice to have stuff on top of that, is going to be ailment, faster ailment damage, ailment magnitude, area of effect, ailment chance, like I said, rage on melee hit, and then I've got a ruby with, is it this one? Somewhere around here I've got a ruby with percent life on kill, so that's good too. And I think that is it after kind of a marathon video. That is it on gear, which means that is it for the build. For those of you who stuck around for the whole thing, I appreciate you. Please leave any questions, suggestions that you might have down in the comments below. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff, whether it's something that I can explain further or if you've got an idea for something that I can be doing better. My next video, my next upcoming content is probably likely to focus on PoE 1 as we enter the kind of hype league start season for 3.26, the Secrets of the Atlas expansion. So if you are a PoE 1 fan, look forward to some new videos on that. In the meantime, thank you for tuning in to this one, and take it easy.